Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Goldberg, and I'm the Executive Director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve University. And I'm also an Associate Professor at Weatherhead School of Management in my office now. We're back on campus as of last week, teaching some students that are here, some that are remote, and navigating our way through the new world order of dual delivery. It's great to welcome Mark Wells back to campus, at least virtually. We had the pleasure of meeting this summer and heard about Mark's journey from corporate world to startup world, and really interesting background, and was thrilled that he was willing to join our speaker series. As for those who are new to watching our speaker series, we always have a student moderator. We're thrilled that Ryan Alexander, who made his flight down to Tulane this morning and was able to join us. Ryan is just completed his undergraduate education in our Masters of Finance program. Worked this summer as an intern for one of our great entrepreneurs, our grads, Arthur Grabowski, on sort of a stealth startup. And so Ryan's back for one more year, finishing out his finance degree at the university, and was a student of mine in my entrepreneurial finance class. So Ryan, thank you for joining us today. For those that are on Zoom and LinkedIn Live, just let Ryan know if you have a question. You can put it in the Zoom chat or let us know on LinkedIn Live, and we will relay the questions to Ryan, and Doug and I will probably be jumping in as well. So Mark, thank you for joining, and Ryan, let me turn it over to you.
Great, my pleasure.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Professor Goldberg. So I'll do a quick introduction and then go from there. So this afternoon, we have the pleasure of being joined by Mark Wells, current president of Sky Technologies, a company that aims to redefine light installation. Mr. Wells graduated with his MBA from the Weatherhead School of Management here at CWRU in 2002. And prior to his position at Sky Technologies, he spent time working in GE's lighting division, Independence Medical, a company that wound up selling to Cardinal Health, and several other ventures. I'll let Mark spend a few minutes summarizing his background and current position at Sky Technologies before we jump into the Q&A portion. And please feel free to enter any questions that you have in the chat at any time. It'd be great to get as much audience involvement as possible. And Mr. Wells, I'll give you the floor here for a couple of minutes to go through your background to get started.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for everyone for having me. Hopefully we'll get some value out of this and be a great exchange for everyone. I hope there's lots of questions to address, but just a quick roadmap for my history and my career as I came up to be where I'm at today. One of the things that I would highlight as a preview is that I'm not the traditional serial entrepreneur. I've, had experiences as Dr. Goldberg mentioned inside the corporate world as well as outside of the corporate world and more entrepreneurial ventures. And I'll try and explain how I not only migrated through my career, but the reasons behind the moves and what I learned in each of those steps and why they were important for leading to the opportunities that I've had and to end up, leading the type of venture that I'm in today. But initially out of school, I came out in a finance and marketing role, went into a financial analyst role, which, I've always loved the finance side of the business, but I got into the real world application and was in a cost accounting financial analyst role within United Technologies, a division of United Technologies. And a year into the role, they said they wanted to promote me to take over cost accounting in a factory in Indianapolis, Indiana. And jokingly, I said, well, if you do that, I'll quit. I actually would much prefer to get in front of customers, move more to the commercial sales marketing side of the business. And great company and great sponsorship, they decided to allow me to go do that. And as part of that experience, I got to see firsthand what it was to interact and to try and sell the value of the products and services of that company to our customers. Did a decent enough job that they had a confidence in me that they actually gave me the opportunity to start up a new product line for their home residential building, focused markets. And it was a tremendous opportunity and experience for me to be able to have the backing of such a strong organization and launch a new product line and learn, what that takes and the experiences to try and go do that. And so I did that and stayed on board for another couple of years doing that with the company. In the midst of that, I actually got recruited away. And I think you'll hear as one of the themes for my career, everywhere that I ended up, it was, I'd like to sit back and say I had this amazing plan laid out of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. But it really was just sort of serendipitous or by happenstance that I would think about what it was I wanted to learn next. And then, the right opportunity would come along that would give me the ability to go learn that. So as I was going through this new venture creation within a large established corporation and business, and learning the sales and marketing side, I got recruited away to go into a company actually in Nashville, Tennessee, called Magnatech. And they had a leadership development program, which was very attractive to me. And the opportunity was to go into that company, rotate through all of the major functions within that business and apply Lean and Six Sigma methodologies to projects within each of those areas to learn the business, to improve that through those approaches, and then ultimately come out and be in a leadership role in one of those functions that I had spent some time in. So the opportunity seemed great to me, and then it ended up being a great opportunity and a big learning for me, especially applying the methodologies, but also having the opportunity to sit in each of the major functions from finance, manufacturing, warranty services, et cetera, within the business was great. You become a jack of all trades very quickly, and especially when you have a deliverable that says you're going to study how that process functions, and you're going to look for improvements and make a recommendation to the leaders of the business as to what they could do better to improve the efficiency or outcomes of each and every function that you roll through. So anyway, I was in that program for just about a year when the company did a strategic alliance. For all intents and purposes, it was very close to a joint venture, the definition difference being they didn't share equity in the venture, so it was a strategic alliance and not a joint venture. But it was between General Electric's GE lighting business and Magnatech. And as part of that deal, some of the folks that were in this program that I was in, as well as commercial leaders within Magnatech, had the opportunity to interview and possibly join GE. And I was one of 9 people that interviewed to do it. They offered the opportunity to 2 of us, and I was the only one that ended up going to GE, but turned out to be an absolute perfect fit for me and a great opportunity. So I went to work for GE's lighting group, managing the what's called a ballast. It's a power supply for lighting, essentially. Sales region in the Northeast. I was out of Baltimore and managed 17 reps and went through that. And so that brought me over into the larger organization of GE, and being able to actually go into a direct sales leadership role was a great experience in the Northeast. Out of that, I rolled through a promotion up into Cleveland, which is how I ended up at Case Western. I had actually started my MBA in Baltimore at the University of Maryland, and then had to drop out of that midway through the first year and restart all of my efforts at Case Western, but it ended up being well worth it. I really enjoyed the school and program, which is a big reason why I'm here today. But anyway, I went through multiple roles within the GE organization at the headquarters. I went through product management roles, marketing roles, Six Sigma role, back into product management roles, managing some of the largest portfolio products within the GE lighting group and portfolio. And then in 2002, as mentioned, I graduated from Case's program in the Entrepreneurship program. Tremendous time there. And for those that may not, I'm sure if you're affiliated with the program, you'll know the name Richard Osborne, but Dick Osborne was an amazing influence for me, and just a great supporter and voice for and face for the program that exists today. So tremendous opportunity and time for me. But as I graduated the program and I continued getting promoted and moving up through the General Electric organization, I then got promoted to become the vice president and region manager for the Southeast. So I moved down to Atlanta, and I managed about 104 different employees and hundreds of millions of dollars of responsibility for the lighting. And at that time, they had combined a couple of businesses, so it was lighting and electrical distribution. And I did that for 3 or 4 years, and then quite honestly was ready for something different, looking for a new opportunity. And I was presented the opportunity to move to China and become the country general manager or the president and CEO for GE's lighting, electrical distribution, and appliance businesses in what they call Greater China. So essentially 4 territories or countries: China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. But the exciting time for that was this was in 2005, late 2005. So the intent for me being there and the experience that I got over the next 2 years was really building up and supporting all of the infrastructure buildup of China, as well as the buildup for the 2008 Olympics. So if any of you recall the Olympic venues, the Bird's Nest or the just slipping my mind now, the Water Cube and whatever, some of the different venues, we did all of the lighting, electrical, security for that. So incredibly, fun time to be there. And it was, it was the fastest time of China's growth, and GE at that time was in its heyday as well. So it was a really, really exciting time and place to be there. However, getting to the entrepreneurial stuff, I was 34 years old at the time and just had my first child, and was sitting and looking at this and saying, I've always had an entrepreneurial bent, and a lot of my customers, my own mother was an entrepreneur, and a lot of my friends, had businesses that they owned or whatever, and I had an affiliation and an affinity for that world, and decided that, if I was ever going to do it, this was a time to do it. And so I decided to leave the position from General Electric as I came back from China and go into an entrepreneurial venture, my first one. And they were, it was 2 businesses. One was around lighting technology, another was around lighting distribution. And turned out to be great businesses, although the technology side didn't work out as well as we would like. We luckily didn't lose any money, but didn't make any money. But on the other side, the lighting distribution side actually turned out to be a great moneymaker, but I would term it as great for one person, but good for 2. And I had a 50-50 partner in that business. And so after a year, we had improved the business tremendously. And it worked out well, but I had figured out in that year that wasn't what necessarily I wanted to do for the rest of my career. And it wasn't going to create a big enough capital event or an equity event that I would be able to roll that into something else and go build. I'd have to snowball it. And with 2 of us, it would be difficult. So anyway, I decided to sell that business, which worked out incredibly well financially for me, as well as for my partner who I sold it to. But, I then was, quite honestly, at this time is late 2007, thinking about just taking a little time to figure out where the next opportunity was, maybe find something I could invest in and do that. But I had promised when I left GE that I would call them and let them know if anything ever changed in my entrepreneurial venture. So I did that. It was a great conversation. They said, listen, we're happy for you. We would love to bring you back and do something with you, but we don't have anything that's at the right level at this time. And I said, great, I'm not really looking at this time. I'm really trying to figure out where I'm going to go next, what I want to do. 11 days later, they called me and said, hey, we want you to come back to Cleveland, Ohio and run the North American business for the lighting group. And so that was an opportunity that luckily I did not turn down, and I felt, couldn't pass up. So that's exactly what I decided to do. And so I came back and ran what is the Flagship brand business for the GE Lighting Group. So any of the GE Lighting products you would see, the brand portfolio out there, I was in charge of the sales, marketing, and commercial operations for that entire business unit. So again, it was an opportunity to learn, big responsibility, different things that I could learn on somebody else's dime, a little bit of my time. But I always sort of had a bent towards, again, getting back into the entrepreneurial world. And an opportunity arose. Some of you may or may not recognize the name Jack Welch, but Jack Welch, former CEO, very famous CEO of GE at the time, who, by the way, just recently passed away. But Jack was involved in private equity, and the private equity group he was with, Clayton, Dublier and Rice, had purchased a medical company here in Cleveland, and they wanted some executive leaders to come invest in the company and come run it, but on a private equity venture. So it was 50% Clayton, Dublier and Rice, 40% Goldman Sachs, and then 10% leaders and employees like myself who come in and invest and build up the business and scale it and professionalize it such that you can then flip it for sale a couple of years later. hopefully. So I came into the medical business. It was a company that was comprised of two businesses. One, Independence Medical, was about 2/3 of the revenue, and another called Edge Park Medical, about 1/3 of the revenue. I came in to run the Independence Medical business. So there was a CEO over the entire venture. I was the senior vice president and general manager for the Independence Medical business, and another gentleman ran the other business. So we came in, it was at the time, I'll speak to just the Independence Medical side. We were a, family run business, $350 million in revenue, and a very, very unique culture. And so the learnings that I got through this and the experience was tremendous, and figuring out how to take a family run business that has a very unique culture and transition that to a more professionally led, delegated responsibility, empowered organization that becomes scalable. Also had to align functions, all kinds of things to create specialization and scalability within the organization. Flash forward to 2 years later, and we had already brought the business from $350 million to up to about $800 million. And then this was in late 2010, early 2011 that the transition to Independence Medical took place. Flash forward 2 years later, Cardinal Health came in, and we actually sold the business to Cardinal Health. So the original investment for the private equity groups was $840 million. Flash forward 2 years later, we sold it for $2.1 billion. So a very, very nice return and profitability for the equity groups, and obviously for all of us involved as well. But the real learning there was, how to come in and culturally transform a business and capabilities to be scalable and then be attractive towards larger organizations and a strategic buyer at that point. So great experience there. Cardinal Health incentivized the leaders to stick around for a few years, which I did, and rode those incentives out. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, I continued to consult with the company I'm now at. The Inventor has an amazing product, but it needed a lot of work to go through some regulatory challenges and coding challenges, and then to go out and start to secure the capital necessary to align all those pieces and to start to execute on the strategy of becoming a standard for the installation of lighting and electrical products that also then ports smart home technology or smart technology with it. So anyway, I was consulting for them, and they had asked me to come run the company about 6 months to a year prior to when my incentives would mature or vest with Cardinal Health. So I said, listen, I can't do it for 6 months to a year, but at the end of that year, let's take a look at it and see if I want to do it. And so I did choose to do that. And so this one I've come into, I've invested significantly in the company. And this is for my first experience, this is my true first real startup of a major technology. And then securing, financing through seed investors. And now as we sit here, really going through our Series A funding level. So it's been a great experience as well, but and tremendously exciting technology and position that we're in, but a lot of hard work, and COVID has not been easy. I'm sure there'll be hopefully some questions around that as well on us, but we're in a good position to weather the storm and eventually come out of this with the capital necessary to make our major launch, which we're prepared to do here in the next 6 months or so. So that brings us to where we are today. Hopefully that helps and wasn't too much, and we can open the floor and have the discussion for whatever questions.
Thank you, Mark. It's a very interesting background, and something that stands out to me is something that you mentioned at the very beginning, which is that you're not the typical serial entrepreneur, so to speak.
Right.
It would be interesting to sort of start our conversation on that topic. And so I think one of my questions is that when a lot of people hear the term entrepreneurship, they immediately think sort of the startup working out of a garage or the Silicon Valley movies and all that. But clearly, large firms, even more and more, it seems like, are emphasizing entrepreneurship as something they look for in employees and leaders. So could you talk a little bit about how sort of your entrepreneurial drive helped you while you were working for larger companies like GE and Cardinal Health and all that? well.
Yeah, well, first thing I would say is that the approach, at least I took either consciously or just by luck when I was young, was that I felt it was better. I always had that bent and desire to go out and do something a little more where you have skin in the game and you have an equity position that you can, take the risk and hopefully reap the rewards from. But I felt it was probably prudent or wise to at least go learn enough about business and about leadership and about challenges to, gain that experience before I would go and just throw my money at it and go do it. And so in that sense, one thing I've noticed through my career is that when I would meet successful entrepreneurs, typically you think, oh my God, they must just be brilliant. You sort of think of, the Steve Jobs or whatever, but, not to say that all entrepreneurs aren't pretty darn smart, but a lot of us here on this, call are smart people as well. So when you meet with the entrepreneurs, you'll realize they're not necessarily that much smarter, or any smarter than the rest of us. Do they work a hell of a lot harder? Well, depending on your style, whatever, but they all work pretty damn hard, but we all work pretty damn hard. At least, as you get into your career, you'll find that you're doing that if you're going to push towards success. The difference is their tolerance for risk. They see an opportunity, they get 80-90% of the information and they just go. So, it's sort of the good plan today is as good as a perfect plan tomorrow approach in their minds. And they just take those risks and they solve the challenges and the issues that come along as they do so. They don't make uninformed, decisions to just leap in total faith. They have good amount of information, but they're not necessarily the types of personalities that will sit and gather 100% of the information, cross every T, dot every I, do all of that stuff. They get enough of a feel and understanding of the market and where they're going to go and the opportunity, and then they jump towards it. And so, I had to work within myself and these learnings within these companies, how to lower the risk aversion, right? To become a little more risk tolerant. And one way that I felt to do that was obviously to gain the experiences in starting a new venture, gain the experiences in watching the customers and companies you work with and how they do it. And then knowing that you have a solid foundation of understanding of the operations, the finances, et cetera, of the business, that you're not going in blind and trying to learn everything all at once. You have a chance to go do that. So that was my sort of risk management approach and the ability to learn as I went through positions. So the flip side of that question that you had asked is, how does that help you in a big organization? Well, honestly, one of the challenges within large corporations and organizations is that you sort of, there's a natural tendency to manage towards mediocrity. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. It's just, the risk is not necessarily wildly rewarded, and the risk can end up with you losing your job. At the same time, the rewards that are associated with good work and everything else, you can be promoted quickly and do whatever, but the reward and the payoff is fairly a low slope linear world as well. So people in that, tend to sort of operate on a continuous climb towards whatever goal that may be. When you have a bit of a more entrepreneurial mindset and you look at it, you treat it differently. Whenever I had a product line that I was in charge of at GE, I treated it as my own business, as if, I am literally the general manager within that product line. Now, it was a great experience being in product management because you have to deal with every single facet of creating the product from R&D, deciding which ones come out of that and are going to be commercialized, how to build the support within the organization to go commercialize it, how to secure the funding necessary to launch it, and then to secure the attention and the support of the sales resources and distribution, everybody to take the product to market. Right. So it's a great experience in all of that. The downside to it is that when you have that, you have responsibility for all those things. You have authority over none of them. So you have to learn to influence people indirectly, and you have to have the ability to sit down and talk to each of the stakeholders and each of the functions that support the success of that product and make those things happen. And, that's a tremendous responsibility, but it's also a great opportunity to learn. And so when you go about that with not like I'm just sort of bureaucratically going through and getting my check marks through each of those functions, but you look at it as this is my baby, I'm going to launch, I'm going to do this. And you're in there with true ownership and passion behind that, whatever it only lends to give you the opportunity for success, and then success builds success, right? You get the opportunity from there to go do bigger, better things. And that's a differentiated, I think, in large corporations, if you have folks that operate that way versus traditionally on that linear, slow slope that I referred to.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the things I'd be interested in hearing more about too is, was the sort of the transition going from the corporate world to sort of the more startup world? And you touched on this a little bit about how to overcome that risk aversion. Could you talk a little bit more about sort of the challenges of making that leap? If somebody is considering making that leap, what advice you might give them to, maybe push them to make that jump if they're interested or inclined?
Yeah, I would say, again, you've got to make calculated or take calculated risks, right? And so you've got to make decisions on as good of information as you can get. And you can decide where the balancing point is to move on that early, or when the opportunity's right. Don't miss the window, but at the same time, you don't want to jump half informed. So you sort of got to collect as much information as you can. Sort of stating the obvious things, I would tell you just personally, you got to be financially prepared for it, and you got to be prepared to weather storms, because any project or anything you ever do in your life, however much time and money you think it's going to take significantly more than that. And so you have to know, that's just part of the problem, the challenge and the problems that occur when you're in any sort of either startup, especially startup, but even in an organization that's going through a large transformation. It's going to take longer, and it's going to be more expensive than you ever think. And so you have to manage towards executing exactly what you planned on and the money you wanted to spend. At the same time, you have to be realistic that those challenges are going to come, and you have to sort of balance those two realities to make it. And you just have to be prepared to go through that. The other thing I would tell you is that, lend or put yourself out there with mentors and supporters, and ask for as much guidance and support as you can get. And I will tell you, in the groups that I run in and entrepreneurs that I dealt with, they are all more than willing to help, and they look and enjoy the success of new startups and other people almost as much as their own success. And so, there's a lot that you can learn from folks like that. And you just got to before you jump in and do something, I would surround yourself with, unofficially, I call it your own advisory board or support group that you can lean on when you run into these challenges. We've had them with the company I'm running today. We are a year and a half behind where we wanted to be for a launch because of regulatory coding requirements that we had to meet and get approvals for, that we never planned to take as long as they did. We are in a unique position. We'll talk in a bit, hopefully, about, the funding. We're in a position where we need significant funding for a launch. We don't necessarily, and this is going to sound odd, we don't want a bunch of small investments, because that dilutes the equity and the value of the company. So you're playing a balancing act. You need money to run today, but you don't want to dilute your value, right? You need big money for tomorrow, but we're sitting in a COVID environment where, a Zoom call is great for this format, hopefully, but it's not the greatest format to get someone to invest $150 million into your company. So those are the types of challenges, whatever. But, back to your question, it's have a good group of people you can lean on, get advice, make sure you're financially prepared. And then on the mental side, make sure you're mentally prepared that it's going to take longer and it's going to cost you more than you ever planned, but you've got to manage towards that original goal, but be realistic on when those challenges occur and where you need to make some tolerance acceptances.
Well, that's interesting. I've heard the sort of the idea of making sure you have a solid support network that's been emphasized by several entrepreneurs in this speaker series. So it's interesting to hear that. I think I'm going to throw it over to Professor Goldberg for a question here.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I'm really enjoying the conversation. Mark, you mentioned Professor Richard Osborne, who I got to know as a colleague. I never had him as a student, although I got to be inside the classroom. And in many ways, actually, some of the things we're trying to do with the speaker series and bringing folks like you back to campus, at least via Zoom, is inspired by Richard. I mean, Richard taught his courses by leaning heavily on the network of folks, other alums, people in the business community, sharing stories. And one of the things that I've seen happen out of a lot of Richard's former students is both informal and formal networks that would build. I think folks saw Richard in the classroom, they saw the networking that took place, they saw the importance of relying upon each other. And I'm sort of wondering, you know, whether it's Richard and his influence on you specifically, or just sort of more broadly, networking. And this is a really challenging time. I mean, we had the fortune to get together in probably one of our first kind of in-person meals. You know, we sat outside and had lunch early this summer, but for the most part, we're all networking and doing things in this period like this. I was wondering if you could maybe just comment specifically about Richard and the power of networking, and then maybe more broadly kind of giving advice to our students that are sort of looking to build connectivity, jobs, network in this kind of challenging time.
Yeah, so I would say there are two areas in dealing or, you know, in experiencing the gorilla, as he called himself, right? When going through the program that have stuck with me, you know, and will stick with me forever. One was the way that he approached dealing with the valuations of the companies that, you know, you would look to be involved in, or, you know, that would be, you would be selling, trying to make an equity event occur to your advantage. And just the approach that he took, because it wasn't just a quantitative financial approach. He did a great job of connecting and understanding how personal these businesses are to the folks that started them, the entrepreneurs that are involved, and, you know, how to think about approaching the either acquisition or involvement, you know, an investment into one of those businesses that weren't purely financial. So, you know, dealing with the egos, or, you know, and I don't mean ego in a negative sense. I just mean that you've got someone who, this is their baby, this is their child. They've started this from scratch. And they've got a lot of pride in what they've done. But, you know, the reason other people come in and invest, or the reason that other people come in and acquire, is because they see opportunities to take it beyond where it is today. And you just have to, the ability to balance understanding the human side of what that entrepreneur needs to hear and wants, with the financial side of the expectations of, you know, listen, this is your EBITDA, you know, even if you adjust the EBITDA, here are the multiples that happen in the industry, blah, blah, blah. That's all very quantitative and sort of clear formulaic approach. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with a person who's heavily invested and, you know, emotional about the business that you're dealing with and getting involved in. Or if it's you, think about if you're on the other side, you have to then flip that script and say, okay, where am I being emotional? Where am I being a little too tight in my holding of the reins and beholden to my own ideas of what this is versus what the person coming in and buying it may think it is. So I think that you know, just his approach in explaining how his experience of dealing and being on the board, I don't know if you recall how many boards Richard was on, but it was many, many boards when I was going through school. I think it was 12 or 14 different boards that he was involved in, either heavily involved on the board or at least advising, et cetera. And so he had many experiences dealing with these folks and these types of events. And the way that he made that real and personal from both directions was incredibly, incredibly valuable. And then I think the other thing that stuck with me was, again, it's more, we'll go more to the quantitative side, just understanding how to truly benchmark and then to capture for yourself what would be the synergies. So for the, you know, company that you're looking to be involved in, or you're even looking to sell, if you're, for example, when we sold to Cardinal, we looked at, you know, our EBITDA rates and we looked at the multiples in the industry, but we knew for Cardinal, this was a strategic fit that was incredibly accretive to their overall margin rates. And so there was something more than what just the numbers would say for us, right? So we would sit there and say, well, in the industry, people are getting a 13 multiple. And let's just say that, you know, make the numbers easy, it was $100 million of EBITDA. You're saying, okay, well, then that's going to be $1.3 billion in valuation. Very simple formula. But when you look at it from their perspective, and they have earnings gaps to fill, and they're looking to say, you know, our margin rates have diluted over the last few years, and we need a kick for the investment community and what that will do for our stock. we need that to happen. And because of that, you can sort of backward do the math and says, okay, that's probably makes us worth more like double, right? So we're more like 2.6 billion. And from there, you start into the negotiations, and you realize that from the quantitative side that those are great benchmarks to start with, but you have to understand the actual people involved in the transaction and what each of them stands to gain, including the synergistic parts of the deal. And you have to try, as the seller in this case, you have to try and capitalize on that. And as the buyer, they're going to obviously try and minimize having to pay into their synergies. They're going to want a traditional multiple and say, we're done. So if you think about it, in our case, you go from a 1.3 or 2.6, you settle at 2, and everybody's sort of happy, right? It's still $600 million better than the deal was worth to them, and we're getting a $600-700 million premium over the traditional ratios. And I think that Professor Osborne did a great job in lining out. Again, it's somewhat back to the human side, but it's understanding how each player looks at the deal and finding that value in the middle, as opposed to just settling on a straight formulaic approach or trying to be over emotional or irrational about it.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. This question might be a bit of sort of a change of gears here, but I would be curious with AppSky Technologies how COVID has impacted, and the whole pandemic has impacted your business from two perspectives. The first is from a supply chain perspective. I've heard a lot and read some articles about sort of how a lot, especially for startups, they've had trouble sort of managing the supply chain disruptions that have occurred because of the pandemic. The second perspective is from a capital markets perspective. So has there been a lot of trouble or more trouble? Have you had additional trouble raising capital? Have you had to consider alternative funding sources? And obviously you could probably spend a whole hour talking about each of those topics, but if you could just give a sort of high level on how it's impacted your business from those two.
Yeah, so actually one of them I can sort of cover very quickly. So we're pre-sales, pre-revenue. So as far as supply chain, not much impact at all because we're not really building anything today. Although we do have an operation in China where we do pilot builds of the product to demonstrate capability. But so we haven't had much of a disruption there. Also, what we're really selling is the value, and what we're working through with this company is licensing the IP for royalty income from manufacturers that will actually make the product using our technology design, our IP, and pay us a cents each or a percentage of the value of those products as they sell in the marketplace. So it's more of a royalty stream revenue versus build a bunch of inventory in the factories, line up all the raw equipment, and then sell the finished goods. So a little bit different. That's on the core technology. We do have on the smart technology side of our business, we do have the costs of eventually producing and building. The flip side of that is that it's a little different for us because the smart technology could actually be built either in a lower cost country, or it could be built in the US because there's not much labor involved in the actual build of the electronics that are incorporated with our core technology to make the smart capability. So quite honestly, it's we're not at the point of producing, but we have the ability to produce in the US. We have the ability to produce in China where we were, or we actually have the ability to produce in Israel, where we have a technology center as well. So it's a little different. We don't have that big challenge with that. The capital market side, I could talk to for a long time, but I pretty much gave a preview and an answer to it. There's always good and bad in every situation, especially today with the market being down 650 or whatever it is at this point. But people have, they're looking for opportunities to invest in things that aren't necessarily tied to the market, but that they have a high level of confidence in. So that's a good thing for us. The challenge for us is that we're, again, at a point in the organization where we're ready for the major launch. One side of our business, the core technology, the royalty licensing part, doesn't require a ton of funding. So we're focused heavily on that right now. For the smart product side, it requires a tremendous amount of funding. So for us to raise $5 million or $10 million does more to dilute the long-term value of the company for us than it does to support the ongoing business. We're lucky. We're in a position that we have enough money that we're continuing operations and we can weather the storm for a fairly significant period of time. But we're also stuck because we need or would like, in order to do a major launch, anywhere from $100 to $150 million. And although you have this market out there that is craving something to invest in that they could have confidence in, it's difficult to gain that level of confidence, to take people through the technology, introduce them to the company and the team, and to have them go through the deep due diligence necessary to invest that level of funding into the company when many people aren't traveling across the country. They're not wanting to meet in large groups in the room, and they're not wanting to be in close contact with people for a long period of time. So we're sort of stuck in this no man's land of, we don't want to really dilute our value and take small investments. At the same time, we were trying to push hard and trying to raise money with the large investments. And the last sort of real world detail to that is that our headquarters is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And if you followed where the hotspots are for the COVID issues, South Florida has been a challenging area of the country. And so getting people to come down to that operation down there, which is where we sit, it has been a little bit of a challenge. But we've had people come in, and we're continuing to do it. And we have letters of intent from multiple people at the levels of funding that we see necessary to launch. But you'll find this out. Hopefully you guys someday are involved in deals of, this significance and size or whatever, that you can have, letters of intent and you can have everything in the world signed, but you can even be quote unquote at the altar and things can still fall apart. You just never know in the investment world. We have a saying, we say there's a distance of a half of a world between someone's pocketbook and their mouth. Right, or their mouth and their pocketbook, right? A lot of people say what they want to do, they'll sign letters of intent, but when they fully get in, they want to try and get a valuation that just doesn't work, or they want a level of control in the organization, which doesn't work. In other words, I'll give you the 100 million, but I'm going to have, 3 of the 5 seats on the board. Well, that doesn't work. So anyway, those balancing acts, but that's the challenge right now, is trying to balance getting folks down, meeting with them, letting them go through the full due diligence and gain the confidence to make a significant investment as we head into the launch and commercialization side of our venture, for the smart technology.
So as you approach sort of the launch of your products, so what's the strategy for breaking into a sort of industry that seems to have a lot of established names? Like when I think of lighting, I think a lot of obviously GE, I think of Philips, I think Samsung, which are obviously multinational sort of behemoths. Do you anticipate sort of there being a challenge there? And what's Sky Technologies' plan to sort of overcome that?
So yes, initially that is a big concern. But there are a couple things that are unique and position us well to address those. First and foremost, this is a unique technology that no one else has, and really to sort of solve around the IP that we have would be difficult on its own. So we have a unique value proposition, and it's accretive, or it's new to the market. It's not cannibalizing anything existing for the current players. This creates a whole new revenue value stream for the companies that would want to be involved. Number 2, we've done the hard work through the National Electrical Code to achieve National Electrical Code acceptance and even recommendation. We are all but required, essentially. So we are what's called code de facto, where they would prefer people to use the technology, but they can't require people to use the technology yet because it hasn't been around long enough. We're the only supplier of the base technology, so they would be creating a monopoly. And so for the National Electrical Code to say, we're going to require this, which they would love to do, they're just not going to do until you solve that problem. So now let's go back to what I said just a few minutes ago. So you've got a market that's not cannibalizing or taking anything away from any of the competitors out there. It's additive to the market. right? Our approach and our entire strategy is to license the technology to the current players. So, that hopefully, and it comes down to, can you strike the right level of licensing deal where the agreement to enter into that license deal is more advantageous, easier, faster, less expensive than trying to work around the IP and create your own technology. And the fact that we have strong IP, it's a very simple solution, but elegant solution that's going to be hard to work around. But you combine that with the code status we've achieved specifically for our technology, it becomes a barrier for them to try and work around that. And if you're willing to license to those companies at the right level, then it's a lot easier for them to just ride the momentum that we've created with the codes, and they can pay a small royalty to us for each of the units that they manufacture and sell under their own brand and name, and pay us a small licensing fee for that. So you're essentially inviting them into the game. The only cost to them is the small percentage for the royalties that they pay going forward. So, establishing a brand new market, knocking down the regulatory concerns and establishing a code preference, and then licensing it to them in an advantageous way is really the strategy that we've got to involve those folks in creating the market and not have them fight us.
It's interesting. I appreciate the insight there. I have 2 more questions here before I pass it back to Professor Goldberg to conclude. The first one is, if you had to give a best and worst thing about being an entrepreneur, what would you say about each of those?
I would say the best part is that you are, captain of your own ship, and you have the ability to make decisions. You have the, ability to shape and create things that you normally wouldn't have the ability to do. The downside or bad side of that is you got to live with the consequences of that. And you wake up in the night terrors of, oh my God, this is going to fall apart. This isn't going to work. And sort of the normal anxieties that come with that level of responsibility and risk taking that come together. And, some people are shaped for that and some people are not. And so, I enjoy both sides of it. But again, I've been in and out of large corporations and smaller corporations, and there are pluses and minuses to everything you get involved in. It's just, you've got to decide for yourself what best works, for you. And this world works for me. I enjoy the heck out of it. I'm lucky to be able to do it. And so here I am, and this is what I do. But trust me, I still have sleepless nights, and I still have the heart palpitations and the concerns, and, the watching for the next investment bubble to come through, and those sorts of things are stressful.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. My last question. So I'm told that Professor Osborne had each student give themselves a nickname. So Professor Sabko, who works in sort of the entrepreneurial, not in the for LaunchNet here at Case, was curious what he asked. What was Mark's nickname by the gorilla?
Yeah, so in our case, I don't recall him giving nicknames as much as we sort of created our own nicknames. And unfortunately, mine is not the most appropriate or the easiest nickname, whatever, but it comes from playing sports as a kid, and I was a competitive golfer and growing up, and the team members, sort of easy to rhyme, Wells as the last name became Smells. And so it was, Mark Smells, right? And so that became the joke and whatever. So that was the nickname, was Smells. So trust me, every time he would address me in class or whatever, like, Smells, what the heck is this about? When they hear my name, Wells, they're like, okay, get it. But until you hear that, when you see just Smells, it's not the greatest first impression.
That's funny. Well, that's sort of, most of my questions, most of the topics I wanted to cover. I appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us today. I think you have an interesting perspective on entrepreneurship, just given sort of your background in both the corporate world and in sort of the startup and entrepreneurial scene. You find a lot of people that are sort of all in one or all in the other, but to have somebody that sort of had a foot in both camps, I think gives people a unique perspective. And I think it's also pretty relatable, because a lot of people who might be in the corporate scene but have that sort of entrepreneurial itch or entrepreneurial desire can hopefully, gain something from this talk and your advice today. So
Yeah, hopefully so.
Appreciate it. And I'll pass it back to Professor Goldberg to see if he has any questions or anything to add.
Thanks, Ryan.
I just love that. I just love that we ended with Mark's gorilla nickname of smells. I love it. There's nothing like Richard Osborne that sort of elicits folks to go deep into their nickname bank and put on your little nameplate. It smells in front of the whole class. That's awesome. Richard was like, I think there's a lot of things actually like in Richard's legacy that, you sort of like get inspired to pull off. Like, I don't think anybody can pull that off the way he did with the nicknames. It's so awesome.
Yeah, he was one of a kind. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for moderating. You did a great job. We will let you get on with your mini weekend vacation in New Orleans. And I'm glad the timing worked out. Mark, thank you for doing this. It was really...
Thank you for the opportunity.
These talks are sort of shared among a number of others that we've had and become really good resources for students as they explore a whole bunch of host of things. And I think Ryan's right. A lot of our students, I think, whether they're coming out of our undergrad program or our MBA program, are not necessarily thinking about entrepreneurship first. And I think your own journey and sort of the point at which you've entered at this point of your career, I think is really instructive to folks because, not everybody is sort of starting the next parking app while they're sort of sitting here at Weatherhead. It might be a long time down the road. So thank you for sharing your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Just a few quick announcements. Next week, we have 3 speakers on the agenda. Next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, as part of my Beyond Silicon Valley course, Lisa Delp, who is the former executive director of the Ohio Third Frontier program, which is the state of Ohio program that supported a lot of entrepreneurship-related initiatives, will be joining us to talk about the role of government in supporting entrepreneurs. At 1 o'clock, as part of our speaker series, another Mark Roman of De Novo Advisors, who's an alum, is going to talk about due diligence and stabilizing operations. And then on Thursday, September 10th, also at 1 o'clock, Matt Sommer, who's an alum and a former senior technology architect at Tesla, is going to talk about pioneering electric vehicles. So with that, again, Ryan and Mark, thank you for joining. Thanks everybody on Zoom, and thanks everybody who's watching on Facebook Live, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great day.